Good evening, everybody. My name is Gina Duvernay, and I'm the Adult Services Manager for Gwinnett County Public Library. Thank you for being here this evening. Tonight, I'm shooing something away. Tonight, our guest author is Elle Cosimano. Right here, let's give her a round of applause. Thank you. Elle Cosimano is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author, an International Thriller Award winner, a Bram Stoker Award finalist, and an Edgar Award nominee. Her acclaimed young adult novels include Nearly Gone, Holding Smoke, The Suffering Tree, and Seasons of the Storm. Elle's debut novel for adults, Finlay Donovan is Killing It, kicked off a witty, fast-paced contemporary mystery series, which was a People magazine pick and was named one of the New York Public Library's best books of 2021. In addition to writing novels for teens and adults, her essays have appeared in the Huffington Post and Time magazine. Moderating today's talk is Sandy Huff. Sandy has an undergraduate degree in marketing and a graduate degree in social work. She is a proud mother of 3 and an avid reader. She loves libraries, and she loves indie bookstores and ice cream in her coffee. Yum. 3 years ago, at age 56, Sandy decided to open her bookstore, Virginia Highland Books, in Atlanta. Please, let's give them another round of applause.
So before we start, just so we don't give any spoilers, who has not finished the last book yet? Okay, so I'll try really hard not to give anything away. Do you mind starting out by just giving us a brief synopsis of the series and your newest book?
Sure, yeah. So I'm assuming probably most of you are familiar, I hope most of you are familiar with Finlay Donovan, but Finlay is the story of a struggling, recently divorced, single mother of 2 young children. She is trying to launch a writing career as a romantic suspense novelist. It's not going terribly well when we first meet her in the first book. And her ex-husband is fighting her for custody of the children. The bills aren't getting paid. Nothing is going well. And Finlay finds herself in a unique situation in a Panera Bread, in a crowded restaurant, discussing the plot of her overdue manuscript with her literary agent, pleading for more time, when the woman at the table beside her misconstrues the conversation, assumes Finlay is a contract killer, and attempts to hire her to her problem husband. And so begins the saga of Finlay Donovan. And through the series, we see Finlay and her partner in crime, her children's nanny, Vero. We see them working together as 2 amateur sleuths to solve mysteries. And I think we have a lot of fun. They're joyful, fun, hilarious, light. I call them light, dark comedies. I don't know, does that work? Can we call them light, dark comedies? Light, dark comedies. And we just have a lot of fun with them. The first 4 books are out. This is the 4th book in the series. Many of you may or may not know we also have a short novella out, told from Vero's point of view. We call that book 3.5. And that's the purple one. If we're going by colors, because we do tend to go by colors here, it's the purple book. It's Veronica Ruiz Breaks the Bank, and that's out now in ebook and audio. And book 5, Finlay Donovan Digs Her Own Grave, is coming March 4th, out in print and ebook and audio. So very excited for number 5 with 6 and 7 on the way.
It's amazing. So I don't know if anyone knows that, like, one of the perks of having a bookstore is we get ARCs, so that we get the advanced reader copies. So this book came out, and I think I got it one of the first days that it was available to get it. And it was like a Saturday morning, and my kids were I was on the couch all day. So I was like, I'm not leaving until I finish this book, so no one bother me. Luckily they, so I'm ready for book 5. So you kind of touched a little bit about Panera, and I know that kind of has to do with the origin story, how you started it. So I'm interested in hearing the whole story of how you came up with the initial idea for the book series.
This is my favorite story to tell. like bar none. My favorite story to tell. The story of Finlay Donovan is very meta in a whole lot of ways, but maybe the biggest way is because the origin, I call this Finlay Donovan's birth story. Really, the story was created, the concept of the story was created in a crowded Panera Bread while I was discussing the plot of a book I was working on with my two beloved critique partners, Megan Miranda and Ashley Elston. And we have been writing parallel to one another since, gosh, I think 2011. We started as baby writers together. And we get together once a year for a writing retreat where we brainstorm and we talk shop and pretend that we're working on our deadlines and all of these things that we should be doing during our retreats. But we enjoy the brainstorming probably most of all, and we typically do that over meals. And we found ourselves on this particular day in a very crowded Panera Bread on a Friday afternoon, right in the middle of the lunch rush. There wasn't an open table. I mean, we got the last open table in the middle of the restaurant. If you know Panera, you know those tables are packed pretty tight together. So we had, college students and people on their lunch break, and the whole place was packed. And we got a little carried away talking about what writers talk about. We talk about imaginary worlds and imaginary people, and we happened to be talking about a book that I was working on that had very dark themes. And I had to figure out who in this book I needed to get rid of. And so we got carried away and forgot that we were in a public space talking about things that maybe we shouldn't have been discussing in a public space. And I was asking questions like, someone needs to die, who should it be? How's it going to happen? And who's going to clean it up? As one does. When it occurred to us that the woman beside us at the table beside us looked deeply, deeply uncomfortable with what she had apparently overheard of our conversation, she got up and abandoned her lunch and walked out. We laughed so hard, and we talked about it all day. And later that night, over far too many adult beverages, we were still laughing about it when someone posed the question, wouldn't it have been hilarious if she had assumed you were contract killers? And it was a kind of a moment, one of those moments you never forget. It was like a light bulb moment when the idea for the story just hit me square in the face. And I said to Megan and Ashley, I said, I have a wild idea for a story, and I need one of you two to write it because I desperately need to read this book. And so Megan at the time, for those of you who know Megan Miranda, she writes domestic suspense and thrillers. She had just had the breakout success, All the Missing Girls. She was doing so well, and I thought if anyone could pull off, because at the time I was writing novels about and for young adults. So all my contracts were for teen books. I'd never attempted to write a book about or for grown-ups before. And so I thought if one of them could pull off, absolutely, Megan could do it. Megan could write this book, and I begged her to write it. She said, no, absolutely not. This is your book, Elle. So what did I do? I went to Ashley next, who at the time had just had massive success with a rom-com called 10 Blind Dates. And I thought if anyone could pull off the comedy aspects of the story that I'm envisioning in my head, Ashley can do it. So I said, Ashley, will you please write this book for me? Because I want to read this book. And she said, oh, hell no. She said, this is going to be your book, Elle. And I said, I can't write this book. This is so far outside my wheelhouse. And they said, oh, you can. And you will, because neither of us are going to do it for you. And so that night we put in our pajamas, and I just know there was a lot of bourbon and wine involved and a lot of Twizzlers and junk food. And after several hours, we had kind of hashed out a character sketch for Finlay Donovan. Who she was, we had her name, we knew kind of her lot in life, and we had the basic premise of the beginning of the story. And that was the birth of Finlay Donovan. So yes, I am still waiting for Panera Bread to sponsor me. I have not received any free soup, for those who are wondering. If anyone knows anyone at Panera, I am still available for conversation.
Well, I love this series because it's it's everything. It's like I never know exactly where we should shelve it, like which section to put it in. It kind of checks every box that you want to read. And then I love all the strong female characters. And it's like life is messy. It's not perfect. They're working together to solve these problems. So I read the first book a long time ago, and so I'm listening to it right now. This week, I was like, okay, I better refresh myself. And then the very first sentence is, it's a widely known fact that most moms are ready to kill someone by 8:30 a.m. on any given morning. And I was like, okay, yes and yes.
I see you, moms. I see all of you.
And then, but she has this support of this friend who, starts out being her nanny and really becomes her Thelma and Louise type friend. Is there a friendship that you have that that's based on?
I get this question so often. Everyone wants to know, who is my Vero? I don't really have one Vero. I have a lot of women in my life who are the inspiration for the relationship in this story. So, my mom, who made it possible for me to make a major career change in 2010. I was a real estate agent for a really long time. And I had never imagined myself writing books. Didn't know that's something I ever wanted to do. And it was my mom who saw my midlife crisis coming and suggested I take the sabbatical. But she was the one who helped me with the children. She was the one who physically made it possible for me to make that leap. And then I have my writing partners, Megan and Ashley, who are the ones who kick me in the pants when I tell myself I can't do something. They've always been the support in my writing life ever since we've started writing together. So there are all of these, and then there are the friends who go way back even beyond, who were there before I was a writer, who knew me from way back when, who've supported me through my most shining moments and then my darkest hours, those kinds of friends that are invaluable. And as all of those relationships, all of those women had some part in shaping that relationship between Finlay and Vero, this unconditional, bizarre partnership, this unexpected partnership between two women who we wouldn't have thought would make such a team, who bring such different strengths and weaknesses to the table, who balance each other so beautifully. And together we see that anything is possible. And it's a lot of women in my life who are my Veros. Yeah.
So, and are there any similarities between you and Finlay?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. More than I care to admit, although I will go on the record because I am mic'd and there are 2 cameras in the room. I have not committed any crimes that I will discuss tonight. No, Finlay is probably the closest voice, the character whose voice most closely mirrors my own. So I would say that it was very easy for me to kind of channel Finlay's voice. We talk about voice in books. It's character voice, but it's also the voice of the author. And sometimes those overlap in strange ways. And with Finlay and I, they really do, because her voice is my internal voice. So if you can imagine listening to Finlay in your head all day long, that's me pretty much 24/7. Her kind of dry, self-deprecating humor comes from a very authentic place. Her mom voice is my mom voice. My children are grown now, but I remember very clearly those days when the kids were young. Mine are 19 and 22 now, but you never forget the feeling of sticky apple juice and crumbled goldfish crackers and the car upholstery. You never forget the feel of, your kid's head on your shoulder. You never forget, the good and the bad. And so I kind of channeled all of those experiences of motherhood as I was writing her mom voice. Her writer voice is very much my writer's voice. The frustrations, the joys, the self-imposed stress of deadlines. I also write at night So, when you see Finlay up in front of a blank screen at 3 o'clock in the morning because the day got away from her and she had mysteries to solve and children to care for, that's me. I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning staring at a blank screen to hit a deadline, because the day usually gets away from me, and that's the time that I end up getting my work done. But so, yeah, I would say there's a lot of Finlay and me. The one thing that we don't share, I have a tremendous support system at home. My partner and I, my husband and I have been together. I was 18, so I don't want to do the math and out my age, but we've been together more than 30 years now. And so we, through it all, he has never questioned any of my wild hair choices. He never questioned when I wanted to quit my job in real estate and run away and write a novel. He never, he was always very, very supportive of all of those decisions. And he remains to this day. I don't want to call him my Vero, but he's my very best friend. And so I'm very fortunate in that that's something that Finlay and I don't share, because when we first meet Finlay, she does not have that. And Vero becomes that for her. So that's part of our character that's very different.
Okay, so my kids must be similar age. So my baby is 18 now, and so I'm always trying to find books that I can give to her and not be embarrassed if we're in the same room reading them at the same time. So I really appreciate that it's kind of a PG-13 love interest also, and that she's kind of solo, that she's not totally reliant on a guy also throughout the whole thing. So
Yeah.
I like that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. There are readers who really appreciate the closed door aspects of the book, and there are others who just want me to blow the doors off the hinges. I see you, and I know some of you are out there because you slide into my DMs at all hours of the day and night, wanting me to be spicier. But these are I would categorize them as closed door romances, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Is that this is Finlay's story, and this is Finlay and Vero's love story. Really, if you want to think of it that way, it's a story of a friendship, and that's sort of the mast and the crux of this story. And it was important for me to explore Finlay's character as a woman, not just a mom, in all of its facets, and romantically as part of that. Who is she after her divorce? I wanted to see a woman who had felt like she had all of her choices stripped out from under her. And I wanted to give her choices again. I gave her two very handsome ones. And I think that's part of the fun is watching her kind of blossom and to experience all of the facets of who she can be now. And but at the end of the day, this is the story of two women, and it's the story of a woman rediscovering herself after the trauma of divorce. And so to me, it made sense that we get a touch of the romance, but the story itself isn't centered in the romance.
Okay. Again, just love the human aspect and the complicated characters. And I was reading an article, and you were writing about being the daughter of a prison warden. And I wrote down a couple of the quotes from it. You said, later I would realize the greatest lesson my father taught me is that we are not one-dimensional, that we can't be singularly defined by our last victory or mistake. We're human and complicated, and we all have a backstory. And then you said, orange jumpsuits do not define our whole person any more than a judge's robes or a shiny badge. We are deeper than our tattoos and our piercings. We're more than the diplomas we hang on the wall. We all strip down to what makes us universally human. Telling the good guys from the bad guys isn't always clean cut. And I wondered if that experience affected your writing, particularly in this book, because nothing's black and white.
Yeah. I think it affects my writing in all of my books. This whole idea. So my father was a warden for a maximum security prison for many, many years. And so growing up, our conversations around the dinner table maybe weren't typical. He brought work home with them just like everybody else did. One time, literally, we had one of the inmates from Lorton Maximum Security came home for Thanksgiving dinner with our family in my father's custody. And so, we had some really unique experiences growing up. And I think that lesson, that whole idea that good people sometimes make bad choices, and bad people sometimes can do something redemptive, that maybe we wouldn't expect. And that those lines that, were not always very, very clearly defined by who we are, or who people perceive us to be because of our station or because of our job or our education or whatever it is, that there's a lot hiding under the surface for everybody, good and bad. And so I think one of the things that I always come back to, I've always written mysteries in lots of different flavors, but they've always been mysteries. And I think one of the things that draws me to mystery is that whole idea of peeling back the layers, of recognizing and surprising you too as the reader, maybe pulling the rug out from under you as you're reading and surprising you because someone you thought was the bad guy maybe wasn't all that bad, and someone that you thought was the good guy maybe turned out to be maybe not so great. And the person that you thought did it all along maybe wasn't the culprit. And that's the joy for me, in putting together those kinds of stories, is exploring character, and all of the possibilities of it, making these characters feel more human, flawed, messy. We're all human, flawed, and messy. And giving them layers, and then giving you hopefully a book that you can really chew on, so that maybe you do want to go back and look at it again and kick yourself and say, what did I miss the first time? Gosh, why didn't I see it? I want to give you something to think about, when the book is over. And so, yeah, I think those lessons I take with me with every book, absolutely every book.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about your writing process. So you normally write at night?
I do.
And is it set? Do you have a set time that you write, or do you just kind of whenever the mood strikes, or you try to get so many hours a day, or?
I typically am a night writer because of habit. It used to be out of necessity. When I first started writing, my kids were a lot younger. I homeschooled for a lot of years. And so my daytimes were taken up with momming and teaching. And so my work schedule, my work day started after dinner. And so from 7 to 3, I would write, and then I'd sleep from 3 to 9 and get up and do school again. And, that became the routine. Well, you do that for years, all of a sudden, you've almost trained your brain into working on that schedule. So now I find sometimes the only time I can really be creative with my stories is at night, when the house is quiet, when everyone else is asleep, when no one's on their social media, when my publicists and my editors and my copy editors and my agents aren't nagging me for things. That's the time when my mind is quiet and I can really, really think through my stories. So my work day, as far as the business end of publishing, because there is a big business end in publishing, that all happens during the business day. The night is my creative space. Am I religious about it? Do I do it every night? No, because I do think that there are times when the best work that I do is away from the computer. That's what keeps it fresh. That's what keeps it fun. There's research, there's thinking. I spend a lot of time staring at the ceiling fan. I call it ceiling fan time. That's very important time for me. That's when some of the best Finlay shenanigans come to my brain, is just laying in bed and staring at the ceiling fan, because brainstorming is a big, big part, and just thinking is a big, big part of the creative process for me. So yeah, there are weeks like this one where I'm under a very tight deadline, where I'm going to leave this event and I'm going to write straight through for the next 7 days without coming up for air, most likely. And then there might be weeks where I'm out and I'm doing research and I'm going adventuring and I'm giving my brain a break. And I'm getting out from behind the desk and doing something fresh and fun to keep it fun for me. Because if I'm having fun, then you're having fun. If I'm not having any fun writing the books, you're not going to have any fun reading them.
Okay, so you started out writing YA, and then you made this switch. Was it hard?
Yeah, in some ways, yes. In other ways, no. But I think there's always that question. Everybody wants to know what's different. And I think people are really surprised when I tell them the answer really is not that much. There's really not that much
Had
that's
one of
different.
the ones.
Yes, this is one of my YA babies. This is a kind of a dark fantasy. This is the book we were brainstorming in Panera. Someone dies. I'm not going to tell you who. But yeah, that was my Panera baby. I think people are often surprised. They really, especially if you have not read a lot of YA literature, the assumption is that these books are vastly different than books about and for grown-ups. And I will argue that they are really no different at all. Great storytelling is great storytelling. The difference really is the lens of the protagonist through which I'm telling the story. So really, I'm just kind of having to channel my younger self. Like, I'm having to go back and remember those firsts. You know, I'm having to go back and put a lens on the story that's younger than my mom lens, that's younger than my 50-plus lens, that's younger than the experience of already having loved and gone through loss and work experience and kids and all of those things. But the storytelling is exactly the same. You know, conceptualizing the story is the same. Putting the story down on the page, the process for me is the same. And I think that surprises a lot of people. They think that these stories would be easier somehow. And I would argue that in some ways they're harder. Teens are very hard to capture. I've had two, I know. Most of the time I spend talking to myself. Do you all do this? Like, y'all have teenagers at home, y'all talking to yourself. Talk to myself all day long. Teens' attention is very hard to capture. And I think that it's really the chops that we develop in writing for teens actually helped me when I started writing for adults. The biggest hurdle I had to get over was the mental one. This idea that I wasn't equipped to tell these stories, the idea that I wasn't qualified to do it, which was a lie I was telling myself that I had to get over, that my friends had to kick me past that hurdle. In fact, I think I was better equipped because I already had all the tools. I had already been sharpening them for years. I already knew how to tell a great story. I already knew the essentials of what it would take not only to write a thriller, but to write comedy. And you would think that the two would be vastly different. In some ways they are, but the process and the skill set, the tools I bring to the trade are exactly the same. It's tight pacing and a careful eye for timing. And that's what makes a thriller work is tight pacing, right? You want to be pulled through the story. I'm going to keep those readers moving. I want to keep you on the edge of your seat. I don't want to give you any time to relax. Well, it's kind of very, very similar skills. And of course, timing being a big part of pacing. What makes comedy work, what makes the great one-liner land is timing and pacing. It's knowing when to keep that pace tight so I know when I can break it. And once I kind of got over that mental hurdle that writing this book would be very, very different, or that I was in some way not qualified to do it, at that point I was off to the races and just having a really good time doing it. And then, you know, of course, a story is just, at the end of the day, a great story is a great story.
So you kind of got this long arc going across all of the books, and then the individual short arcs in each individual book. When you started, did you know how many books it was going to be? And how did you plan it when you're starting? You don't know what's going to happen on that first book.
I love this question because I get this question from all of you all the time. Y'all all up in my DMs wanting to know how many books are going to be in the Finlay series, how many more books are there going to be. And the truth is, with series authors, most of the time we don't know. I'm going to say 99% of the time we don't know because it's not up to us. It's up to you. And this is usually where people look at me and scratch their head and say, I don't understand. Well, ultimately, the publisher is only going to buy as many books as they think you all are going to buy. And so the health and volume and robustness of the sales of the books determine the longevity of the entire series. So the more books we sell, the more I get to write, which is how we ended up with books 5, 6, and 7 under contract. So thank you. So that was the most wonderful news from someone who's had series that have never taken off before. You know, ultimately, I think when we first started, I had no idea. I could not take for granted that we would have any more than one book. That's the book I gave myself, one book. I have one book to pull this off. And hopefully a publisher will buy it. And I can tell you, we went out of the gates with this one, with the very first book, Finlay Donovan is Killing It. We submitted to 22 publishers in the first round. We got 19 rejections immediately. So this is, I see some people's eyes getting really, really wide. That comes to a surprise for a lot of people. It was not an easy book to sell for a lot of reasons. So coming into this, I only gave myself the luxury of this one book until Minotaur came forward with an offer and they said, we think we'd like to take a chance on this one. Could we do a contract for 2 books and just feel it out and see how it goes? And so, of course, I said, yes, let's see how it goes. I was very, very excited at that point to get 2 books off the ground. But at that point, I only had the luxury of imagining through the second book, because then the decision is based entirely on how is the first book selling. So we had to wait. As I'm writing book 2, I'm waiting to see, are we going to sell enough books? Is the publisher going to want more of them? Or is it going to die on the vine like some series do? And so we were very, very excited. We had a kind of a slow takeoff for book 1. And then all of a sudden, people started sharing it. People started talking about it. Neighbors started giving it to neighbors. And, you know, coworkers started giving it to coworkers. Book clubs started talking about it. Independent booksellers started carrying it. We had this beautiful grassroots word of mouth groundswell for the first book in the series. And then the publisher came back and said, how about we try 3 and 4? Yes, please. Let's try 3 and 4. Because at that point, they said, do you think you could write more of them? I said, do you think you could pay me for more of them? Because sure. So at that point, we had book 3 and 4. And then book 3 hit the New York Times. Book 4 hit the USA Today. And the more success, the more sales we start to see, that creates a path of longevity for the series. So right now we have books 5, 6, and 7. So I'm able to kind of imagine longer arcs there. But by the same token, something really funny happened. With the first few books, because I didn't know, I'd never done a series before. I was new at this. I had never written a series that had succeeded beyond book 2 before. So I had no idea what I was doing. I was just writing the stories that I thought were fun at this point. And I ended up writing something kind of like a soap opera, where each book kind of piggybacks off the last one, and these arcs kind of bloom and grow across the series. Well, now we're in a situation where we're going to have a long-running series, and we're starting to have conversations about, well, how do we need to change that to make it more accessible for readers who are jumping in the middle so that they're not confused. So the first 4 books, we sort of, for those of you who have finished Rolls the Dice, you see that we did close a few arcs in the first 4 books. And book 5, we're sort of treating as a bit more of a standalone. And I'm not going to tell you where we're going or what that book is going to be. I guess we can, are we allowed to say what that book is about? So the book centers on Mrs. Haggerty. So if we have any Mrs. Haggerty fans, you're getting a lot of Mrs. Haggerty in book 5. But it will be a standalone mystery, kind of featuring our beloved Mrs. Haggerty. And then the idea and the goal is each book moving forward would feel more like a standalone. All of our favorite characters are going to come back. They're all going to make an appearance. We're not losing any cast members, so don't panic. But each book, the mystery, will stand alone. And so that's the goal moving forward.
And so, how much research do you have to do for each book?
The research is the most fun. I have the most fun with the research for these books, and some of it is as simple as Google searching, which obviously that's the easy part. But I laugh because my husband is a internet security person. So I give him a little heartburn with my internet search history. And he's always looking over my shoulder as I'm searching things for these
You're
books.
flagged
Yeah,
everywhere.
He said we are on every government watch list. Like he just shakes his head. Must you search for that? Can't we use a different search engine for that? Must you? Yes, I must. I absolutely must. I must do it for my readers. I do it for you people. So I had to search some wild things for this one. What happens to certain parts of the human anatomy at certain temperatures and certain conditions. Yes, it was. I gave him so much heartburn writing this book. So that's fun. But the most fun I have is when I actually get out from behind the computer. I get to do hands-on research. And I've done a lot over the years that have made these books, I think, feel in some ways more engaging. They certainly make my job more fun. I hope they make your reading more fun. But book 3, Finlay Donovan Jumps the Gun, The Police Academy, is sort of not so loosely inspired by my own experience at Writers Police Academy. I've gone 3 times. It is a citizens police academy for people who write about crime. Hundreds of writers get to go and train hands-on with first responders of all varieties. And almost, I will say almost, because I did take 1 or 2 liberties in the book, but almost all of the classes that Finlay takes in the book are classes that I got to take when I went to Police Academy. So yes, a lot of that was based in very real experiences. No, I did not set any fires. Everybody came away unscathed, but we sure had a really good time. I got to handcuff my critique partners. We got to go look for mannequins buried in the woods under crime scene lighting at night. We got to do presumptive blood testing. We did fingerprint analysis, mock murder trials, all those things. The only thing I didn't get to do the behind the wheel, the evasive driving, which I'm still sad about. But I've searched jail cells for contraband. I've done ride-alongs with deputy sheriffs. We got to do a lot of it. And so I take all of that experience is so much fun, because then when I sit down to write, I'm drawing on those experiences. I took a firearms class. I got my basic handgun certification for, when I was writing these books. So all of that research that I do, I think, enriches the story, and I hope makes the stories more engaging for you.
Let's see. So since there's so much of the story about the publishing industry, how were you discovered? Like, how did you actually, because I know you had another career, and how did that transition go to actually get started?
Yeah, so I was in real estate for a really long time, and my mom was the one who recognized my midlife crisis was right around the corner. She was the one who suggested I take some time out. She said, take a sabbatical and write a book. I told her she was smoking crack. I said, nobody does that. Like, I can't just walk away from my very grown-up life and my bills and my kids and my responsibilities. I was the breadwinner at the time. So it felt to me like a very irresponsible thing to consider doing. To me, it felt like the most selfish thing I could possibly imagine, like walking away from my grown-up obligations to write stories, And after kind of going home and thinking about it, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and then I did. And so I took a 2-month sabbatical from my real estate career. I gave all my business to my business partner for a summer and drafted my first novel. And I remember coming home from that experience, because I took the children to live with my mom for the summer. We lived with my mom for the summer, because she's like, I'm going to make this happen for you. We're going to do this. Like, she was my Vero. She was the one who was egging me on. She's like, I'll take the kids for the summer. You come write a book. I said, my husband, I'm taking the kids to Nana's for the summer. I'm going to go write a book. He said, okay, but he was so glad when I came home. He was like, great, you're going back to work. And I said, we should really talk about that, because I had a really good time, and I'm not sure I want to go back to selling houses. Like, I think I want to keep doing this. And he asked a very important question. He said, are you any good at it? And I said, I don't know the answer to that question. And he said, well, how do we find out? And that was sort of the question that put me on the path to researching what would be involved with a career in publishing. So I started studying online, like reading blogs and reading literary agency websites, reading as much as I can get my hands on about what's involved in getting published. And I went to a writing workshop where I got to bring a sample of my manuscript. And I will say it was like the worst book ever written. It was the worst book ever written. So if you are a writer and you are struggling and you are not sure that what you're doing is worthwhile, all of the manuscripts, all those first manuscripts are terrible. They're all terrible. Give yourself permission to barf out a horrible first draft, because that's where we all start. So I took that terrible first draft to a writing workshop and got some really, really great feedback. I found some critique partners. I started refining my work, and I went into the slush pile. We call it the slush pile, just kind of like everybody else. I submitted a sample of my manuscript with a query letter, which is basically like a business letter for people who want to be published. That says, this is the pitch for the story that I've written, and here's a sample, and here's a little of what it's about, and you know, please love me. And you just kind of wait and hope to hear that a literary agent will want to represent your work. So I came into it cold, with no training, with no experience, and was just very, very fortunate that I found a literary agent who was really willing to take a chance on me. And she, coincidentally, was the agent who introduced me to Megan Miranda and Ashley Elston, who became my critique partners, because we had all started with her at the same time. None of us had any experience. Megan was a middle school science teacher. Ashley had a wedding photography business, and I was selling houses. So clearly we were all super qualified to do this. And so we all had these horrible manuscripts. We were all trying to get published, and our agent at one point just got frustrated with all of us, and she gave us each other's email addresses and put us in a loop together. And she said, please, for the love of all that's holy, go fix each other's books. And that was how we met. And we sort of have been lifting each other up and kind of carrying each other and dusting each other off through the entire process. In 2011, we started sharing work with each other and what we call critiquing for each other. And at the time, we had 0 published books between the three of us. And I think at our last count, I think we're at 33 published novels between the three of us now on our collective shelf. So
It's amazing.
yeah, find your Veros. Find your Veros.
Okay, I think the last question, it gets basically what's next. I know, like, we just had a brief discussion in the other room, and I heard that maybe there's TV gonna be happening.
Yeah. So we've got book 5 is around the bend. We already have the cover out. We're taking pre-orders now for book 5, and pre-orders are the lifeblood of the series. So, you know, if you have an opportunity and you're a fan of the series, now would be an excellent time to put in your order for book 5. We have book 6 and 7 coming after that. And I just got back from LA in April, where we were wrapping up and finalizing what we call a TV option and I'm not allowed yet to say who it's with or who will be producing, because we have to wait for permission to divulge all of that. I will say it is with a big major studio with a really, really, really big producer. When you guys hear who's making this TV series, you're gonna freak out. So I'm super excited about that, and I'm really, really hoping that we'll have more news this winter.
That's amazing. Any questions?
So I teach high school, and reading is my escape. What is your escape?
Reading, actually. I do a lot of reading. And and sometimes I just need to kind of turn off and take stories in a different way. And so I like when I'm between deadlines, I'll enjoy TVs and movies. I like storytelling in every form. But reading for me is a big one. I love audiobooks. I in the car as I'm driving, on planes when I'm traveling. It's a great way for me to kind of enjoy the stories that I want to listen to for me, kind of my escape, because I read a lot for work, and on the printed page. And so I find audiobooks are kind of my awesome escape lately. I love hiking and cooking and spending time with my family and all those other things too. But yeah, reading for me is just the same.
So Finlay Donovan is a big title. What made you decide that name? Because now Finlay is on everything. And so what was your decision process of choosing that name particularly?
Choosing the name of the character or the name of the book?
The character, because now Finlay, is killing it. Like, you had to have other name choices. So what made you decide on Finlay?
Yeah, I really didn't. That was the name from the get-go. From that night after we left Panera, and I probably had too much wine to recall exactly which one of the three of us kind of came up with that name. I will swear to this day that it was Megan Miranda. She swears it was Ashley. Ashley swears it was me. We could go round and round and round about this for hours. But no, when we were brainstorming, we had, pens and notebook out, and we were kind of going through and just putting together a character sketch. And for me, I have a really hard time character sketching until I have a name for my character, and that name has to feel right. And once that name sets, it's almost impossible for me to think of that character as anyone else. And so I'm going to go out and say it was probably Megan who helped come up with the name Finlay Donovan. And once we put that name on the page, it just was. And it was from that very moment forward. Now, the name of the book was not, the original title of the book was The Hit. And when we pitched it, the publisher was like, we're going to have to change the title, which they do. Ultimately, the publisher gets to pick the titles and the covers and all that. We have very little control over that, which is good, because that's not my forte. That's not my strength. You probably don't want me designing your book covers. So it was The Hit. And the publisher was like, it doesn't have enough punch. It doesn't really capture the mood of the book. We need something that's going to be a bit more memorable. And it was my editor who came up with the title, Finlay Donovan is Killing It. We're all like, whoa, this is awesome. Let's go with this. And it stuck. But I paid homage to The Hit because that is the name of Finlay's book within the book. So if you were astute and paying attention, you probably saw it in there.
Talked about the escapism for you. What genres? And what's your favorite book or recommendations?
I love this question. What genres do I read? And I read across so many of them. And I think that probably comes across in my writing, because these are genre-bending books. They do not fit cleanly on any particular shelf, which is the reason it was so difficult. That was why we got all those 19 rejections, because it's a genre bender, and publishing tends to worry about where they're going to shelve these books. So I write the way I read across all the genres. I can hop from a rom-com to a horror to a thriller to a historical mystery and loop back around without to a dark fantasy, you name it, to a hot loins romance. I love it all. For all ages, I can bounce from a young adult to an adult novel. And I feel like taking in all those different kinds of stories is, one, it's a great way to train my brain as a writer, but it also, it kind of opens your mind to all the possibilities of what a story can be. So I read very, very widely. For recommendations, if you enjoy the fun, light, murdery bits about Finlay and you want a kind of something in a similar vein, if someone comes to me and they say, if I like Finlay Donovan, what else should I be reading? There's some other books I can recommend. One of my favorites, and I'm sure you all have probably heard of it by now because it's on fire everywhere, is the Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Sutanto. This one is super fun. It's heartwarming, it's found family, it's mystery, it's light, it's comedic. And her other series, Dial A for Aunties, is also wonderful. Another one that I absolutely love is Colleen Oakley's The Mostly True Story of Tanner and Louise, which is, if you love the friendship between Finlay and Vero, this book so beautifully captures a cross-generational friendship of two women. So you have a 20-something and an octogenarian who are on the run from the law together. I mean, like, you can't have more fun than this book. So those are two that I recommend. If you're more of like an Agatha mystery reader, if you're into more of the traditional mysteries, Kristen Parent has How to Solve Your Own Murder. And I really, really thought that was a masterclass in mystery writing. It just really is so well crafted, so well written. Love the character, love the writing and the voice, and that would definitely satisfy your more traditional mystery readers.
This may get a little personal, Elle, but you referred to Finlay shenanigans. So how many of those have you related to or have you wanted to relate to in your own personal life?
Oh, wow. How many of Finlay's shenanigans? Yeah, so one example. Okay, so book 4, I'm going to try not to spoil too much of book 4. So in book 4, Finlay and Vero and Finlay's mom end up in a nightclub. In Atlantic City was sort of a fun place for me to set that book, because when I was a 20-something, kind of a fledgling real estate agent, I had a group of girlfriends that we were all realtors together, and we would every 6 months go to Atlantic City for shenanigans. And we had a lot of fun. And there is a restaurant in the book, kind of an underground restaurant, that was inspired by a real restaurant that we used to frequent in Atlantic City. It has since changed and grown up quite a bit. It feels less underground these days, a little bit more posh. But back in the day, it was in the cellar of an old house. Like, you'd hit your head on the door going in. It was cash only. It was bring your own booze. And the clientele was very much in line with the clientele who were there in the book. And so, yeah, those kinds of shenanigans sort of all made their way into Rolls the Dice.
So I fell in love with the series via audiobook. So how involved are you in the process when it comes to the voice actor that's selected, or just kind of that process altogether?
That's a great question. So the question is, how involved am I in selecting the voice actor for the audiobooks? How involved am I in that process? It's so much fun, because when they're getting an audiobook off the ground, typically they will send the author a voice sample, 2 or 3 samples, almost like an audition recording, to listen to, and we get feedback. We get to, we can say, yes, this is definitely the actor that we feel best captures the voice that we're going for. Whether or not the publisher goes with the same choice is obviously up to them, but we do get feedback in that. And so when we were first getting ready to produce the audiobooks for the first Finlay Donovan, I was sent 3 samples of very, very talented voice actors. And I listened to all 3, and I needed to listen to about 15 seconds of Angela Dawes before I knew. I didn't even need to finish it. Like, I heard that opening line and I knew it, like, immediately. And she has been the voice of Finlay Donovan ever since. Aside from that moment, that was my only involvement in the process, was making that original selection. And I got to meet Angela for the very first time on tour for Rolls the Dice. The publisher flew her in from Chicago, and I met her in Maryland at one of my signings. And it was a wild moment because she got stuck in traffic on the way. And so she was running a little bit late. So it was a room kind of like this. And I was sitting at the front and I was winging it with a mic, just, running with the show while we were waiting for her. And she walked in at the opposite end of the room and I recognized her immediately. And as she's coming toward me, I broke down in tears. There are pictures of it actually on my social media. You can go back and find them, like bawling. And I did not expect to have that reaction to meeting her for the first time. It was such an emotional moment for me. I felt like I was meeting my character for the first time. And like we just hugged and like we spent like the next hour on the signing line. I made her sign all the books with me. Like it was awesome. She's the coolest. She's just amazing and so talented. If you have not listened to the audio, they are just phenomenal. Just, oh gosh, I didn't ask.
I think that Finlay is being fairly.
I mean, I don't think she's too much older than Finlay, but I had someone ask me a signing, well, how many actors are in the cast? And I said, the cast of what? And they said the audiobooks. I said, one, this is one woman. She does all those voices, all the voices. She does the kids, she does all the men. Her voice for Nick, wow. I mean, wow. I mean, she's amazing. She's amazingly talented. You would never know it's a one-woman cast. She's super, just super.
Well, I think that's a great way of one.
You've talked a little bit about things that have been outside of your control, like the title or the cover or the voice actor. Has there been any scenes that have been cut that you kind of regret, that you kind of miss, that have been out of your control?
From a creative standpoint, I get a lot of say in kind of the crafting of the book. There are a lot of people who provide feedback along the way. I have a lot of editors, and I have an agent, and I have critique partners, and over time, if any scenes have been cut, they've been cut because I've cut them. Because normally the feedback that comes in is almost like a 30,000-foot view. We need to speed up the pacing in the middle, or there's something sagging here, or there's something like there's a thread of the plot that's just not coming together. We need to kind of find a way to make that go away, whatever it is. But ultimately, those kinds of choices are typically up to me. And I take enough feedback along the way that usually by the time I have a finished draft, there's not a whole lot of scene cutting. Most of my big scene cutting I'm doing while I'm drafting. I know in my heart of hearts if something isn't working. If I hit a stumbling block, if I write myself into a wall and I can't get past it, I know I've made a mistake somewhere. If I stop having fun, if I'm not having fun, well, I know I've made a mistake somewhere. I need to back up and figure out where did my path go astray? And sometimes that means cutting whole scenes. So I have whole files on my computer that are scenes that I've cut as I've been drafting the books. And then usually by the time they go to the publisher, at that point it's usually fairly tight, and it's just a matter of like deepening things or fleshing things out a little bit more, or smoothing out the rough spots, tightening up the pacing a little bit. So I can't really say that I can't say that there's anything that an editor has ever made me cut that I've regretted.
Brian, do you already have the whole story in your mind, or are you coming up with it as you?
So it kind of goes back to the question of, are you a pantser or a plotter? So for those of you know, we have these expressions, are you a pantser or a plotter? Do you plot your books up front, or do you fly by the seat of your pants? And so I find I pants more than I plot. When I first started writing, when I was a baby writer, my very first book was so tightly plotted. I was so organized. I had 3x5 cards in a nice color-coded binder with color-coded highlighters, had all my chapters laid out. And when I finished that book, it was as dry and boring as those 3x5 cards. And I learned really quickly that if I don't leave myself room to play during the process, I don't really get I don't get the benefit of, one, having fun with it, and two, exploring all of these paths that come, that kind of open up. So when I start a book, I try to know where the book is opening, and I try to see where the book is going to end. Like who is my character now, and who do I need her to be by the end of this book? How am I going to get her there? And then I like to have 2 or 3 key pivotal scenes in my mind where something important happens, something that shifts the direction of the story. And then for the rest of the way, I let myself play.
Yeah, because sometimes you think, oh, it's going to be this person that did it. It's not.
Yeah.
And I like the way it bounces.
Yeah, and sometimes I surprise myself, and there are days when like that means staring at a blank screen for hours. Or in my case of book 5, I wrote 50,000 words, which is more than half a novel, and I shredded it and started over because it wasn't working. So there are those times too, and that's kind of the risk, the chance you take in giving yourself that kind of creative freedom. It comes with some creative risk. But I think that's where some of the fun is too. Like the very last line of the first book, y'all know which one I'm talking about, because I know you all gasped when you read it. I know you did, because I gasped when I wrote it because I didn't see it coming. And those, right. Yeah. And so like there are those moments where I try to give myself the freedom to have those moments where I surprise even myself, because then you're having fun too.
Well, you have a great sense of humor.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're going to ask you to pull a name for us, if you don't mind, Elle.
Sure.
Okay. And also, I will tell you now that when we pick our winner, if you want to purchase any books, you line up this way on that wall, and if you're ready to sign, you line up that way, facing the table where she'll sign. Okay. Let's see who's lucky tonight. Just one. Emily. Is there an Emily in the room?
Emily, is it Mizzy? Eyes?
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll get ready to do the book sign. We'll give one more round of applause. Thank you so much.